Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. Our guest today is the man behind all the curtains at the Wharton Center for going on 12 years now, the executive director, Michael J. Brand. Mike, welcome to the show.
Morning, Burl. Nice to be here.
And I want to start by congratulating you on a very prestigious award from the Broadway League for your lifetime achievement as a presenter. It's got to mean a lot to you.
It does. It's an interesting award to win because it kind of represents an achievement over some decades as, you know, in executive management. So, and there's an awful lot of good executives in this industry.
And you know, you got honored the same night as one of the great songwriters of our generation, John Kander. And it made me wonder, you've been in it so long, so who gives you goosebumps?
Well, it's just, I mean, the whole industry's in a very dynamic state right now. I don't know if you remember, but when I started off in the 80s, mid-80s, in executive management, Broadway theater was produced by 12 older white men. And now you have rock and rollers, Cyndi Lauper, we just had her at Kinky Boots here. And there's so many diverse creators and teams of creators that are putting Broadway theater together today that the audience is just incredible. It just really represents the whole United States.
Yeah.
Coming to musical theater and plays. And then we tour all those throughout the country and have a brilliant network to take the same quality you get in New York in almost every city in the United States. So it's really become integrated into all of our lives.
It has changed so much too. I remember as a kid, I grew up in Toledo, so we were big enough to get some Broadway shows, and often and we'd get big names, but often what it was, the show finished its run on Broadway, then they took it around the country. And of course, if you lived in some other cities, including Detroit, you'd get shows before they went to Broadway sometimes. Yeah, that's all gone now, isn't it, as far as the big names going out on the road?
No, it's not actually. It just kind of condensed itself to a number of cities. Before I came to my position here, I was in Minneapolis, you know, with what ended up being Clear Channel Entertainment, a regional executive. When we were there, we launched 27 national tours in our 9 years. Or actually 11 years, from Minneapolis, including 2 pre-Broadway shows. Victor Victoria with Julie Andrews, and actually Rachel York was in there, and a number of other stars. And we launched The Lion King with Julie Taymor. Michael Eisner was in the president of Disney, and he was there a lot. Oddly enough, the guy who was the executive producer of The Lion King, Stuart Oken, is now one of the 2 producers of An American in Paris, which is a humongous hit in New York. So, you know, you kind of stick with these same people over your career, and our industry is kind of a real personal relationship, like lawyer-client, doctor-patient, that type of relationship where you have a lot of trust and they know who you are. And sometimes we do deals and we agree on the phone and it's as good as a contract.
Yeah.
So our industry's kind of kept some of the old school flavor to it, and yet it's very much part of this current industry in the media and how contracts are delivered. We used to get crates of VHSs and press kits. Now you download them, you get passwords, and you go on. You know, it's an entirely different industry on one perspective. But at my level, it's just I call the company and I get the boss.
Yeah.
And we make a deal, and then everything starts moving.
And we still see some of the same names. Some Broadway theaters are named after them, but really the big players behind a lot of Broadway theater have been doing it for generations.
You're right. And there are a lot of young people in this industry now. We were just at our big annual road conference for the Broadway industry. It's kind of misnamed now. It used to be just for all of us on the road, but we have producers, creators, so the stars from the shows come and sit on panels and talk about the creative process and how their show came together and how they look at their roles. You know, it's an exciting industry because we're holistically kind of conceived now, where everybody gets to hear the artists, the producers, the creators, and we're all involved. And a lot of us, you know, are Tony voters, so it's become much more of a discussion on the nomination and then the voting process. So
yeah, I'm going to ask you about that later. Maybe you can handicap a couple of categories for me. But let's talk about Mike Brand, how he got into this. I know you started your career as a trumpeter with playing in big orchestras, including symphony orchestras. Grew up in
Minneapolis, St. Paul. It was kind of not an accident, but you know, in the 60s and 70s, the arts industry was just beginning to evolve. Major performing arts centers started cropping up. What became the Kennedy Center was planned, Lincoln Center. Communities all across the country started revitalizing old theaters or building art centers. It just wasn't that. There were even performance high schools like North Carolina School of the Arts, Interlochen High School Academy, you know, all these high schools for kids in the arts. Yeah, I mean, that all was part of that same era. So when I was a student at the University of Minnesota, I was studying with one of the trumpet players in the Minnesota Orchestra, which was, you know, a 35-week season, which is basically a part-time job. So they played in the Minneapolis Pops Orchestra and had lucrative teaching positions in colleges that weren't faculty, they were artists in residence. So lo and behold, in the mid-70s, these orchestras went to 52-week seasons. So all of a sudden, I was there, you know, at the level where I could play with the symphony when they used extra players. So we got all those jobs.
Yeah.
You know, I was playing in the Minnesota Opera then, Minneapolis Pops Orchestra.
So you could actually make a living.
You could make a living. And then I got these artist in residence contracts at St. Olaf, Carleton College, University of St. Thomas, which are very lucrative schools. So very talented kids go to those schools. And so it wasn't a difficult job. And then I just was freelancing with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, and Dennis Russell Davies had his audition concert, and he came back and introduced himself, and I said, I just freelanced with him.
Who was he?
He became the music director of the orchestra for, I think, 8-9 years, and he's a huge conductor in Germany. I think he does the Beethoven Halle Orchestra right now, and he's a Juilliard grad, was big in New York, and he rose the chamber orchestra to a certain level. And right after him came Pinka Zuckerman. But Dennis told me, he said, well, I'll tell you what, if I win this position, I'm going to hire you. And I said, okay, you know, that'd be fine. So
hire you as what?
He wanted me there all the time because I just took jobs when I was doing it. Actually, you know, you played with all these orchestras, and I used to play with the Metropolitan Opera when they toured every year. I studied with their principal trumpet, Mel Broyles, for a while. But I made most of my money in the recording studio, Sound 80 and a number of these studios, and some were just in people's basements, you know, and it kind of looked like your studio here. It was just outfitted. You can't tell where you are when you're in them. You know, it's all you got is a headset on and you're playing, right? Yeah. And it was a very lucrative business at that time because the union scale in Minneapolis was a lot cheaper than Los Angeles. And a German named Herb Pillhofer immigrated to the United States, and he brought the first digital recording equipment to Sound 80, and everybody wanted to be on that equipment. And I just happened to be one of the first call players, so you make a lot of money in studios.
Now, I understand you made a little money with the guy who went on to have a big name, Garrison Keillor.
Right, yeah. He started off in the 70s a daytime host, I think a 7 a.m. show. And then he gravitated to having a Saturday night concert, radio broadcast mostly, from this old decrepit theater, which is now the Fitzgerald Theater. It used to be called the Schubert Theater. And I remember,
great names of theater.
Yeah, I think it was part of the chain. But I remember sitting backstage with one light hanging from the top, you know, dim light, and you could see mice and stuff running around the periphery of the backstage, you know. They had an old refrigerator that had a handle like an old Frigidaire from the 50s. He opened it up and it was all full of old long neck beer bottles, you know, and the odd thing, we'd sit there and play, and then there'd be a break, and we'd have to be quiet, and then Garrison would do his monologue, and nobody ever saw him, you know, until we were doing these shows. And he's a quirky-looking fellow, you know, all his life, and he wore red tennis shoes and, you know, jeans and stuff, and he'd talk straight into the wall. He'd be like this doing his monologue, and we thought, whoa. But it grew into a huge thing, you know, and he
Why
had
do
a
you
huge...
think?
I think he was at the right time where people liked the throwback to the old radio days. Remember they used to rebroadcast some of those old shows that our parents listened to? And my wife
Still
buys
can
all
hear
these
them on
things.
Sirius, yeah.
Yeah, you know, and she listens to them when I'm traveling. I don't, you know, I don't really enjoy listening to all those. But and in those days, they didn't have a lot of money because it wasn't big yet. But they never could afford to pay us. We'd put together these Lake Wobegon boxes, box cassettes, 4 or 5 cassettes in a little peach crate-looking carrier, you know.
Right.
And we had to sign royalty contracts, and we figured, well, you know, we're never going to see any money on this. You know, and 3 times a year you get $800-900 checks from the wireless company. I never knew what that was. All of a sudden I realized that's Minnesota Public Radio's catalog company, you know. But this thing turned into a multi-million-dollar business.
That's amazing, you know. And there's always been, I think, in American show business, there was Will Rogers, there was Herb Schreiner, and I guess Garrison Keillor fills that role. I don't know who's next. Maybe he's the end of the line. But
well, you know, F. Scott Fitzgerald was from St. Paul. And this whole show is created in St. Paul. Minnesota Public Radio is headquartered in downtown St. Paul, and it's right at the foot of the hill where the old the Blue Bloods, the St. Paul Blue Bloods, the descendants of J.J. Hill, the Weyerhausers, the people that created the empires in the 1800s and over that turn of the century. And it was always a literary place. The Commodore Hotel is still there, where Fitzgerald used to have his salons in the evening, you know. And I can just imagine them in their light suits with ties in the heat of the summer, and it overlooks the Mississippi River. I think Garrison kind of picked up on that history, and it kind of came to life on the radio, and these fictitious Minnesota places just kind of endeared him to the public. You know, and even people in New York like it, and Lake Wobegon has nothing to do with New York. You know, it's an entirely different
now
feel.
I can't recall if he's coming this season or he was just here.
He's coming at the end of the month. He now takes on his Summer of Love tour. I think this one's a different name, that he programs it to do. I think they do about 8-9 weeks in the summer. In Michigan, they do us. They probably are going to do Meyer Gardens again, and then they do Interlaken Outdoor Kresge Auditorium, and that's generally where they stop here. His radio show, I think, just was broadcast in Ann Arbor, the Michigan Theater, I think. So he's quirky. You know, he's up there now. He doesn't do the live show that much. They produce segments of his past shows, and then he produces this tour. And I think it helps him because the creative process he goes into to do a show each week is quite extensive. So I think this accommodates his age and what he wants to do.
Well, you get to spend a few minutes with him when he comes.
Yeah, I always go back and say hi. He remembers me. He never says anything. We just, like, we pick up the conversation where we left off the last time.
Right.
So, you know, when he did his broadcast here a few years ago, we got Luana Simon on the show, and he really liked her. He met her a year before when we hired him to do his poems with the symphony here.
Yeah.
And he intrigued by her. So when we did the deal for the radio show, he sent me an email. He said, I want you to put that president on the show, you know. He said, I enjoyed speaking with her. You know, she plugged into him immediately, you know, and they stand like this, you know.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And so he really got into what, you know, they were talking about. And when he was done with the rehearsal, because I wanted to go down there and make sure everything was okay, because, you know, it's our boss, and we got to make sure everything's cool. And then he didn't say anything. He just, we started talking. He said, you know, there's a lot of ghosts in this auditorium theater. He said, I can feel ghosts. There's ghosts here from way back. Tell me about this. And I said, well, Eleanor Roosevelt did the grand opening ceremony here in 1934, and some of the greatest artists in the world have played here. I would have liked to have heard the Count Basie band with Ella Fitzgerald They were here in 1954. Philadelphia Orchestra with Eugene Ormandy came many times. New York Philharmonic, everybody, the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra.
Yeah.
It was a tremendous lineup of artists that have come to this city over 100 years.
You know, and what you touch on a subject, and of course you do get very big names and some big orchestras, but when you mention the Metropolitan, that sort of thing, are those days gone when we will see them in Lansing?
They're gone today.
Yeah.
We're trying to bring back some of the big dance companies, but their contracts are so tight as to where they go and how they travel. When I played in orchestras, you can only go so many miles a day, and if you go beyond that miles, they have to fly you. You can't bus, you can't train anymore. So it's become a massive amount of underwriting to get an orchestra on the road. Hence, we present a lot of European orchestras and Russian orchestras because their governments put in huge subsidies to let everybody on the planet know that they have a good arts going on in their countries and communities. It is very expensive, although that, it just may change. It's a dynamic world we live in, and things get to a peak and then they kind of drop back to where they were. It'd be nice if we could afford, ABT, American Ballet Theater, New York City New York City Opera no longer exists, but if the Met could tour again, but ABT and the Bolshoi each cost about $1.2 million for a week, which leaves us out, because we do 1 or 2 nights. So what we do now with the big companies, we split the week with Detroit. So we'll do a Tuesday and a Wednesday service, and then it goes over to Detroit and does the rest of the week. So we can mitigate the huge expense, and they don't mind going an hour drive because both theaters are easy to load in, and it works.
I want to get back to your story because you're that rare left brain, right brain person, an artist who became an executive. What inspired the transition?
Well, I was reaching 20-some years playing, and I was getting kind of tired of it. I had kind of reached the peak of what I was doing, my compensation, and Pinchas Zuckerman resigned his position in '85, effective in '86. He was going to take another post somewhere, and I thought, I'm kind of tired of this. And a brand new art center went up in St. Paul, the Ordway Theater, which was the home of the chamber orchestra and the opera. And I thought, I want to be part of this. So I did this really weird thing of leaving the chamber orchestra, which is a very lucrative job. My friends thought I was screwball and lost everything. And I interned at the Ordway for 4 months, and then they hired me to do sponsorships. And 18 months later, I was vice president of programming and marketing. So what was going on at the Ordway was indicative of a lot of art centers. People who built the buildings did such a good job, the boards hired them to run it, and they hadn't a clue what was going on. And I spent my whole life playing with artists, and I knew some managers, and so it wasn't hard for me to move in to a programming marketing area. And I think in '86, I was one of the first people in that kind of a position to hire college graduates out of marketing schools instead of flute players or string players that couldn't get enough work, so they marketed the arts. So we hired top graduates from the University of Minnesota School of Journalism. And in order to graduate from that, you had to have a year mentorship in a major media company. So they landed with their gears down and could take off, full speed. So we created a really fine team. And in 3 years, we created the largest subscription base in the United States, 28,000 subscribers. And then we built it up when we moved into Minneapolis a few years later. So it was a big gamble that paid off for me. Part of it was I met a few people from Columbia Artists in the Beverly Hills area that mentored me on how deals are made, how margins are. Don't ever pay the asking price, wiggle around on it and all these kind of things. And then the board of directors I had were 7 of the top vice presidents, executive vice presidents of the major companies. in Minneapolis, and they groomed me on business and that end of the stick, and it was just a very intelligent opportunity to learn from top corporate, basically CEOs. A guy named Mike Paxton was a vice president of the Pillsbury Baking Division, and he taught me so much about marketing to minorities. He gave us Pillsbury's Latino marketing team to help us way in the 80s, before anybody looked at diversity, to reflect Latinos in our programming and our covers of our marketing as a welcoming thing, you know, well, long before the arts were even attuned to that. And he left one time, just to show you the quality of this guy. He left, he quit Pillsbury, and he said, "Why are you doing that?" He said, "Well, I'm gonna move out to New Jersey, and I'm gonna run this little ice cream company, and I'm gonna make it the best ice cream company in the world." You know what the name of that was? Haagen-Dazs.
Yeah, he did.
You know, he did it.
That's-
Yeah, he did it. And
So is that your goal? Let's make the Wharton Center the best performing arts
that's
center
what
in
we're
the
all gonna.
world?
That's what we're doing. Yeah, I think.
And you have done a lot. You, as I said, you've been here almost 12 years, and of course the Wharton Center was very important in our community then, but now it's very important in the state. And tell me about the expansion and why you've done that.
Well, we on the staff, you know, kind of reinvented ourselves 3 times now in my times here, and including the building. And we made centric to us our education program, and we named it, you know, the Institute for Arts and Creativity, and Credit Union underwrote it, so their name's on top of it. And we really wanted to look at the donor, our patrons, as very centric to everything we do. So we created the donor lounge, many more amenities. And I think what our staff and all the volunteers that work with us, and now even our donors, when we talk about the Wharton Center, they're talking we. And the we is not just the staff, it's not just the board, the 2 boards, the Inner Circle Board and the Advisory Committee, but it's all of us that support the center. Everybody feels like they're part of this. So it's been part of an engagement idea that we are engaging people to come and look and see what we do. And pretty soon people say, "How can I help you?" You know?
And you're not just doing it in East Lansing, though.
No, we're doing it around the state. During my interview, Luana Simon hired me when she was the provost. And in the interview, she said, "You know, I'd like to see the arts. I'd like to see the Wharton Center affect the arts on more of a statewide basis, where some of these great performers that you bring, you can take to other cities and get some education programs going there." Nobody dreamed we'd have this institute, which is so huge now. But it was kind of her dream that we do the basic land grant footprint, I think you could say, in the arts. I mean, Michigan State was known in agriculture and natural resources and packaging in a lot of different areas. And since Luana became president, that footprint's been enhanced by medical schools, law college, and the Wharton Center.
She's
And the
expanded
Broad,
the
and the Broad
brand.
School, yeah, because a lot of the Michigan State's resident art collections are rented by other museums around the state. So we're playing a much larger role in the arts and sciences than since Luana's been here, and I think with the FRIB and all the things she's done in the real STEM systems of colleges, the sciences, are going to be an extraordinary effect for Michigan State. But it's interesting how the pendulum swings from the arts and the sciences. So it's something we're looking at connecting with too in our education programs.
Well, you know, I wanted to ask you about. I mean, there've been so many celebrities who've come through the Wharton Center over the years, and you know, I've seen a few, but you've seen them all. But you know, we all want to know, what are they really like? You know, what's Jerry Seinfeld really like? What are some stories that?
Well, most of them are, you know, very pleasant. Jerry has a tendency to sit in his dressing room with his legs crossed, just, you know, by himself. He looks immaculate in his, you know, $10,000 suit. He flies in a private jet, comes there, does a sound check, waits for his time to go on stage, does it when he's done, thanks everybody, hops in his limo on his jet, and he's home for bedtime in Beverly Hills. So, but a number of the artists now that we hire are very interested in being in a part of our resident program. So it's something that we're looking at very seriously and trying to raise more money to sustain more of these artists. You know, so we had, you know, Wynton Marsalis for a whole week, commissioned. a new work for symphony and jazz orchestra. We did that with the College of Music here and the Detroit Symphony. And we're kind of looking at targeting other big artists. I'd like to see, you know, Diana Krall here sometime on a residency.
Oh, that'd be
And
great.
we're gonna
I saw
try-
her show here, and it just blew me away.
Oh, wasn't that a great evening? Yeah, we're going to look at her again for 16, 17. She's got a lot of new albums out. But there's a lot of artists like that that really care about what young people think, and that some of them are creators, choreographers, writers, musicians, and we want to try and bring more of those here on the long-term residence. So the programs that we're trying to create aren't, you get to see Diana Krall for one night, but she'll be here a number of times throughout the year. And things, so that it has kind of a weaving effect that you experience these artists for many more times than just one night.
Yeah, I'm a big Tony Bennett fan. A member of my staff is a huge Tony Bennett fan. His 90th is coming up. You got him booked yet?
No, but that's something we should look at. We kind of figured his 85th was one of those, like we did with Dave Brubeck, you know, but this guy won't. He's like the ever-ready bunny. Years ago, I hired him on behalf of an Italian restaurant to open this thing, and he thought Tony Bennett walked on water. And we had Tony Bennett there for 4 shows and 2 nights.
Wow.
And it was one of the most unbelievable things, because it was like you were in Vegas in a mid-size showroom listening to Tony do a full set.
I saw a double bill of Tony Bennett and Diana Krall at that outdoor place, Pine Knob, I think they used to call it. But you're one of those relative handful of people who get to vote for the Tonys, which are this weekend.
That's right.
And so how about handicapping at least the top play and the top musical, and maybe, you know, what you voted for and what you think will win?
Well, you know, there's a lot of good plays on Broadway. I think there's one that's a real cut above, which is A Curious Incident of the Dog After Midnight. That is an incredible show, and we're on the route for it the season after. It's going to be an incredible experience when you see this play. It's predicated on an autistic child. The musicals are going to be an interesting battle. There, you know, Lisa Crone, a local playwright, has Fun Home, which has got 12 nominations. Something Rotten has 9 nominations. It's hilarious. It's a cross between American humor and Monty Python. It is just incredible. And then American in Paris is one of the most beautiful Broadway shows ever created. It's got 2 major ballet stars in it, the lead woman and the lead man. She's from the Covent Gardens Ballet, and he is from ABT. And they're really good singers and actors.
Gershwin music.
And Gershwin music.
Yeah, it's hard to beat.
And it's so interesting seeing ballet in there. She's on point a lot of times. But just a lot of the dancers are really strong. A ballet dancer is a very strong body, very athletic. And it's interesting seeing the mix of what we call traditional Broadway Fosse type dancing and ballet.
Okay, so I know every show is great next season at the Wharton Center, but if you can only see one, what do you recommend?
Well, you know, Motown, I think, is going to be the new music when our audience here loves some of the classic music, what they call jukebox musicals, and Jersey Boys is one of the biggest hits. So if your basic donor and patron base are what we call rockers, you know, American music lovers, and not as necessarily classical music, these musicals are very important to them. So obviously the 2 big top-selling shows next year are Jersey Boys, which is a repeat, and Motown, which is really about, you know, Michigan. It's got a lot of Michigan's heritage in it.
We got to let you go. Mike Brand, it's great having you on. I hope we can get you back. There's a lot more stories that I want to
We have a lot of
ask you
stories,
about.
Burl. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.